Many animators aren't really happy until they've manually tweaked the keyframes. You can use something called the graph editor to achieve this, and it's located right here by clicking this button. Now, of course, there's nothing in it currently because we don't have any keyframes and we have no object animated. So what I'm going to do is just turn this off temporarily, go to Layer, New, Shape Layer, and I'll just draw out a star as usual. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to animate this guy by hitting P on the keyboard, clicking on the keyframe, and I'm going to just scrub a little bit in the timeline and move it over here. So now we have 2 keyframes. Then I'm going to go in the middle and just add one more. So now that we have 3 keyframes, I can click on the graph editor, and we have this visual representation of the motion in our scene. But there's a whole lot more to the graph editor. We can look at the changes over time by going left to right, and we can see the value and speed changes of our object by looking up and down. The higher the line that we're looking at here, the faster something's moving. So I'm going to just go ahead and manually scrub and show that it's moving pretty slow, and then all of a sudden we have this abrupt change. But we can change how we look at the graph editor as well by using the buttons on the bottom. The buttons on the left side pretty much deal with what we're looking at in the graph editor, whether we're auto zoomed in, and we can look over here on this side to change the keyframe type. I'll talk about some of these right now. First of all, on our eyeball, we can choose the properties that we're looking at. So we can show selected properties, show animated properties, or show a graph editor set. So I'll go ahead and put animated properties on. And as you can see, since we have animated properties and we've animated something, we're still looking at the same thing. Over here on this button, I can change the graph that I'm looking at. So I can look at a value graph to see things over time. So I can see where on the X, Y, and Z axes my object is. And I can click on these keyframes and manually tweak it myself. So I can move things around and say, I want this over here on this frame, or I want it up and down or left and right, by just grabbing these guys. Now what I can do as well is I can go to a speed graph and see how fast things are moving a long time. I can show the transform box when multiple keyframes are selected. So I'll go ahead and do that, and now we have this transform box that we can click and drag. I can also put snapping on or off. I typically like it off, but you can put it on if you like. You can also auto zoom with the button here. With this guy, we can fit the entire selection to the view, so we can really focus and tweak the keyframes. No reason to see past what we don't have animated. Now over here, what we can do is we can separate the dimensions, so we can see the values in 2 different lines. And what we can do with these guys here is when I select the keyframe, let's go ahead and grab this one, I can change the type of keyframe. So I can make it a hold keyframe if I want to. And by the way, a hold keyframe is really handy when you don't want the thing to move left or right or top to bottom. It will literally go from one keyframe and snap right to the other with no change in position. It's really, the best way to describe it is when you watch a movie and 2 actors are talking to one another. We're looking at one actor and boom, we're looking at the other actor. The camera doesn't move over so we can see it moving from one actor to the other. So it just snaps there. That's an example of a hold frame. We can also use this button here to do the same thing. Or we can turn it into a linear keyframe or a Bezier keyframe. So we have the handles that we can then tweak. So that is what you do with the graph editor. It's a little scary at first because we have a lot of grids and charts and all kinds of little boxes and things and numbers. But after just playing around with it and moving the positions of these keyframes, you'll get a feel for what happens when you do just that, when you move things up and down or left and right. Just look at your object that you've drawn and then literally click on one of these guys and move it. You can also just keep your mouse on a keyframe and look at the data that's inside of this box to see the position of the keyframe and where it is in the graph.